The First Easter by Tim and Jenny Wood, illustrated by Fran Thatcher. Jesus had warned the disciples that one day he would be arrested and put to death. Now his words were coming true. Pilate had given in to the demands of the crowd and ordered that Jesus should be crucified. Jesus was whipped and then tormented by his guards. They had heard that Jesus called himself a king, so they dressed him in a purple robe and pretended to bow before him. One of the soldiers even made a pretend crown from thorn branches. The crown was pushed hard onto Jesus' head until the sharp thorns pierced his skin. Then the soldiers beat Jesus and spat at him. When they had tired of their fun, the soldiers ordered Jesus and two other prisoners who were also to be crucified, each to pick up and carry a heavy wooden beam. These were the cross pieces to which each man's hands would be nailed. In the early morning, the little procession of prisoners and guards set out for Goliath, the place of execution. This was a hill a little way outside the city gates, whose name meant the place of the skull. Jesus was so weak from his trial and the whipping that he could hardly carry the beam. The officer in charge of the guards ordered a member of the crowd, an African called Simon, who was visiting Jerusalem for Passover, to carry it for him. By this time, many people in the crowd had stopped shouting at Jesus. They began to remember all the good things he had done. Some even cried when they saw him bleeding and weak. When the soldiers and their prisoners reached Golgotha, the soldiers stripped off Jesus' clothes. Then they laid him on a crossbeam and hammered long iron nails through his hands. The crossbeam was hoisted up and fastened to a tall post. The soldiers did the same to the other two prisoners, positioning one on either side of Jesus. The soldiers then settled down to play a game of dice. They knew that the prisoners would suffer agonizing pain and desperate thirst in the blazing heat. It would take hours, perhaps even days, for them to die. Jesus watched the soldiers. "Forgive them, Father," he whispered. "They don't realize what they are doing." Over Jesus' head, the soldiers had put a notice which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." When one of the other prisoners saw this, he spoke. "If you are the Son of God," he said to Jesus bitterly, "why don't you get it down from your cross?" "Don't say that," said the other prisoner. "We deserve our punishment, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned to Jesus and said, "Remember me when you become a king." "You will be with me in heaven today," promised Jesus. A small crowd had remained at the foot of the cross. Some of the people mocked Jesus, but among them were many of Jesus' friends. They could hardly bear to watch his pain, but they hoped that by being close to him, they would give him comfort. Jesus looked down and saw his mother and his friend John, the brother of James. "Look after my mother," he whispered to John. Then he looked at his mother and went on, "John will be your son now." At noon, when the day should have been brightest, it became dark as night. During the darkness, Jesus gave a terrible cry. Soon after, he cried again, "It is finished." His head sank forward. He gasped the words, "Father, into your hands I give my spirit." Then he died. Two of Jesus' friends, a rich citizen called Joseph of Arimathea and a religious leader called Nicodemus, were given permission by Pilate to give Jesus a proper burial. The two men took Jesus' body down from the cross. They washed it, wrapped it in fine linen cloths scented with myrrh, and laid it gently in a nearby tomb, which had recently been dug in preparation for Joseph's own burial. They rolled a huge stone over the entrance. The next day was a Sabbath, when no Jews did any work. Jesus' friends spent the day mourning for him. One of them, Mary Magdalene, to whom Jesus had been very kind, wanted to put perfume and expensive spice on his body. At dawn on the following day, the first Easter Sunday, Mary and a friend went to the tomb. To their surprise, they found that the huge stone that blocked the entrance had been rolled away. They peeped timidly inside the tomb. There was no sign of Jesus' body. The two women ran to find Peter and John. "Come quickly," they gasped. "Someone has stolen Jesus' body." Peter and John rushed to the tomb, but all they found were the clothes in which Jesus' body had been wrapped. When Peter and John left, Mary stayed in the garden, crying quietly. Suddenly she looked up, startled. A figure was standing behind her. "Did you take Jesus' body?" asked Mary, for she thought this man must be the gardener. "Mary," said a familiar voice. Mary looked up in amazement. It was Jesus. Mary threw her arms around Jesus and hugged him. "Run and tell my friends that I am on my way to be with my Father in heaven," said Jesus gently. Mary ran off in great excitement to spread the wonderful news that Jesus was alive. Some of the disciples were overjoyed. Others, like Thomas, were doubtful about what Mary had seen. But over the next few weeks, all the disciples saw Jesus for themselves and came to realize that the most amazing thing had happened. Jesus had risen from the dead. Soon the time came for Jesus to go home to his Father. The disciples knew that they would not see him again, but they did not feel sad. They knew that Jesus' spirit would always be with them. Besides, they had work to do. They planned to travel the world, sharing with people everywhere the good news about their beloved King. And so they did. Since then, millions of people have come to love and trust in Jesus, and I've been grateful for the peace and purpose he has brought to their lives.